Hey everybody! Alright, so I know I'm very late to the party here, but I wanted to make a video that's a very minor follow-up to the video that I made on Jaru. Specifically, I wanted to address what seems to be the most controversial claim I made in that video, which is the claim that Darkners are not objects. Now before we really dig in, I want to explain a little bit as to why that claim was so prominent throughout both videos. Cookie and I started writing this video over a year and a half ago, and back then we had no idea this would be a controversial claim. We both felt the same way, and it wasn't until a few months before the video came out that I started talking with other people on Discord and on other communities about it, and I realized that this was a pretty controversial thing to say and we were going to get a lot of comments about it. So I told Cookie about this, and we were faced with a couple different choices, none of which were very good. We could either add a disclaimer at the beginning of the video going through and explaining our opinions as to why we thought Darkners weren't objects, which would entirely derail the video and just kind of ruin the whole pacing. Or we could go back and painstakingly edit out every single time we mentioned it from the video. And that would have been very difficult because we would have had to reorganize everything, redo all the music that we had set up to be timed with the different segments. It would have been a mess. And as you can tell, we decided to go with the final option, which was to just leave it be and deal with the comments. However, since it's the most common point of disagreement in that video's comment sections, I decided to go ahead and make a response. Now, I want to start off by saying this is not going to be an epic debunk where I prove all the haters wrong definitively and slam dunk all over them. In fact, I'm well aware that I cannot prove my point with 100% certainty. Now hold on before all the people who disagree with me get too excited. I'm also not here to admit that I was wrong. While I do think it's impossible to definitively prove that Darkners aren't objects, I also think it's impossible to prove that they are. Due to a lack of hard evidence, it really all depends on how you interpret the facts we have in front of us. So my main goal in this video is to show that it's not quite as clear-cut as a lot of people would think, and to give reasons for why I interpret the facts the way that I do. So to start off, I actually did give a bit of evidence in the Jaru video, which was talking about Darkners' backstories. The connections that certain Darkners have implies a lot more history than just them being objects would allow for, especially the connections that have been set up between Spamton and Tenna. People have proposed ways that Jevil and Spamton or King and Queen could know each other, and most of the explanations given by people are reasonable enough that I'm willing to just accept them on face. But specifically with Spamton and Tenna, the connection is so hard to draw, and all of the explanations I've heard are such reaches that I can't think of any other possible explanation for this. Now, a very reasonable response here is that everything I just said about Tenna and Spamton's connection is an assumption, and we don't actually know that for certain. And yeah, that's entirely fair. We can't know until Chapter 3 is out. So if you want to assume that there will be some kind of explanation given for this, or that there'll be more facts revealed that'll make it a lot clearer, more power to you. Hopefully, at the very least, you can see how I came to my interpretation. Now, another response to this I got was people using a different part of the Jaru video against me. In another segment, Cookie and I discussed the idea that if it doesn't affect the overall plot, then minor plot holes are entirely reasonable to overlook. Alas, I have been hoisted by my own petard. Or have I? I have my reasons to believe that the Darkner backstories are a plot hole that can't be overlooked, despite the fact that I will admit they don't have a huge impact on the overall plot so far. Let's go back at the example Cookie and I used in that video, and while we're at it, actually correct a small mistake. Cookie said that humans can't use magic in Undertale. This is incorrect. I will scold him for that later, but in the meantime, let's just pretend that Cookie was right. If humans couldn't use magic, then they couldn't create a magical barrier to seal the monsters underground, thus negating the entire plot of the game. However, even if this were a real plot hole, I think it's still fair to argue that it's minor, because this is only brought up once or twice throughout the entire game, and the actual creation of the barrier isn't that important. All that's important is that the barrier exists and is keeping the monsters trapped. Now imagine, if you will, the exact same scenario, except the barrier's contradictory creation is brought up constantly. Almost every other dialogue box is talking about it. Even though it still doesn't have a major impact on the plot, it would be really irritating to have this contradiction be constantly shoved into your face. That's how I feel about Darkner backstories. Now, maybe to you this isn't a big issue, but to me it is, and so it's really difficult for me to look past it. Now let's take a quick detour to address one of the smaller claims people have made. So a lot of people have pointed out to me that we see Lancer turn into a card and that Lancer and Rules card turn into cards. And yes, I did play the game. I did see that. A lot of people really seem to think this is a slam dunk, and I don't understand why. So when somebody in a fictional setting turns into something else, it doesn't mean that they are that thing for certain. Like in the movie Aladdin, when the genie turns into a goat here, nobody is saying, "Oh my gosh, the genie was secretly a goat this whole time." Now, I know that in the movie Aladdin, we have the context to say with certainty that the genie is not secretly a goat, but hopefully my point is clear that just because Lancer turns into a card, that doesn't necessarily prove he is a card. Now, I do want to be very clear so I don't get misconstrued. I'm not trying to avoid the connection that Darkners have to these objects. Now, I personally think that there's another way for Darkners to maintain a connection to these objects without actually being them. If I'm being honest though, I don't really have much aside from my own speculation as to what this connection could be. Personally, I think that the light world and dark worlds are parallels to each other, similar to a link between worlds. And when a Darkner crosses over to the light world, they occupy the object that is their parallel. Kinda like how some ghosts are depicted as being capable of possessing inanimate objects. Although in the case of Darkners, they can't really make these objects move and instead just kind of sit in them like a Pokeball. But that's just my speculation. Maybe I'll be proven completely wrong, but that's what makes the most sense to me. And last but not least, there is one final point I wanted to talk about, and it is the biggest by far. That would be Last Thursdayism. For those who don't know, Last Thursdayism is the concept that the entire universe was created last Thursday, and so all of our memories and everything that makes the world look old are actually all fake. Some people take this concept and apply it to the dark worlds of Deltarune, saying that every time a dark world is created, it creates all of this fake history. Some people refer to this as retroactive history, but I'm going to be honest, I don't really respect this theory very much, and so I will be calling it Last Thursdayism. Now, that might seem a little bit uncharitable of me, but the reason why I don't respect this theory very much is because it is completely unfalsifiable. If you don't know that much about logical fallacies, you might not know why something being unfalsifiable is a bad thing, so let me explain real quick. Theories are supposed to adapt, bend, and conform to evidence. It doesn't matter how obviously true you think your theory is. If you're presented with evidence that contradicts it, you need to either give it up or find a way to make the evidence fit with your theory. And just for the record, that applies to me too. If I'm wrong about anything I said here, then I'm going to have to adapt as well. But anyways, if a theory is falsifiable, that means that you can find evidence to prove it true and prove it false. There's criteria for both categories. The downside of unfalsifiable theories is that there's no evidence to prove them wrong, but there's also not really any evidence to prove them right. Hopping over to the real-world version of Last Thursdayism, there is absolutely no way to distinguish between a universe that has always existed and a universe that came into existence last Thursday. You could do as many tests as you like to try and prove the age of the universe, but I can always say, well, the universe just came into existence with the properties to make the tests give you that result. The same thing goes for the Deltarune version of Last Thursdayism. Either the history is fake, or it becomes completely indistinguishable from actual history. The reason why a lot of people get behind Last Thursdayism is because they really like the idea of dark worlds representing fiction. And I can understand to an extent. I'm a fan of Andrew Cunningham myself, but I don't think that the concept of dark worlds being completely fictional works as well as a lot of people think it does. There's a reason why metaphors and analogies don't map perfectly onto the things that they're representing, and that's because reality is complicated. There's a difficult balance between being specific enough so that people understand what you're trying to say, but being vague enough so that people can bring their own interpretations and map their own experiences onto your work. If dark worlds are just literally fiction, then there's no room for interpretation. They're just fiction. And I find that devalues Deltarune as a form of art. I get that for the most part people probably just won't agree with me on this, but I really like being able to interpret and unpack and analyze different aspects of Deltarune. And to me, just kind of wiping the backstory of the Dark World off the table ruins a lot of it. There's a lot of mystery and intrigue going on with the Dark World's backstory, and to find out that it's all fake is kind of a slap in the face to anyone who cares about that mystery. It really reminds me of those dark and edgy theories that are like, oh, your favorite cartoon show takes place in the mind of a dying child. It's something that might seem cool to some people, but is actually really simplistic and kind of steamrollers over any other interpretation. Well, those are my reasons for thinking that Darkners aren't objects. If I'm being honest though, I do have more I'd like to say, but I've covered all the main points for now, so I think we can wrap it up. I am willing to go more into detail in the comments, so if you want to hear more, leave a comment and we can talk about it there. Hopefully this video has maybe convinced some people to come to my side, but at the very least, I hope it's let some people know that there is room for debate here. If you still disagree with me, then hey, no worries. I hope that at the very least I've helped to explain my views a bit more clearly. Hopefully chapter 3 and 4 come out soon. Please, Toby, please, I can't take it anymore. And when they do, we can update our theories accordingly. Until that time comes, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.